It was supposed to be a showcase of Russian power and economic prestige, world leaders and business delegates gathering in Putin's hometown for what the Kremlin bills as Russia's answer to the World Economic Forum in Davos. But on the very morning Russia's most prominent international gathering was set to open, something happened that no amount of Kremlin spin could contain. Black smoke began rising over the historic skyline of Saint Petersburg, billowing, thick, and unmistakable, as Ukrainian long-range drones struck an oil terminal less than 11 miles from the conference venue. The attack was not just a military operation, it was a message delivered with surgical precision to the front door of Vladimir Putin's most prized propaganda event. And that message was chillingly simple. Ukraine can reach you anywhere, anytime, and there is nothing you can do to stop it. Welcome. Tonight we take you inside the most consequential aerial war the modern world has ever witnessed. A war being fought not with the massive armored columns and aerial dogfights of the 20th century, but with small, relatively inexpensive, highly intelligent, unmanned machines that are rewriting every rule of combat as we know it. This is the drone war between Russia and Ukraine, now in its fourth year, and it is escalating at a pace that has military analysts, NATO commanders, and world leaders deeply alarmed. Tonight, we break it all down for you. The strikes, the strategy, the technology on both sides, and the enormous question looming over all of it. Is this conflict still contained to Ukraine's borders, or is the rest of Europe next? Let's start with the incident that has the intelligence world buzzing this week. On the morning of June 3rd, 2026, Ukrainian long-range drones flew over 1,000 kilometers. 1,000 kilometers, more than 600 miles, deep into Russian territory and struck the Saint Petersburg Oil Terminal, a strategically critical energy export facility that manages the flow of Russian petroleum products into the Baltic Sea. Flames erupted. Black smoke poured into the sky above one of Russia's most iconic cities. Local authorities were forced to shut down the city's airport, even cutting off mobile internet services in an attempt to contain information about the strike. The timing was not accidental. The Saint Petersburg International Economic Forum, an event so prestigious the Kremlin calls it Russia's Davos, was opening its doors that very same morning. Foreign business delegations, international dignitaries, and representatives from Saudi Arabia, which was this year's guest of honor, had gathered at a venue barely 17 kilometers from the now burning terminal. Instead of projecting an image of strength, stability, and inevitable victory, which is precisely what Putin had planned, the opening of his showcase forum was overshadowed by columns of fire and smoke. John Foreman, a former British defense attaché who served in both Moscow and Kyiv, put it bluntly. He said the attack was, quote, exceptionally humiliating for Putin. He noted that rather than being able to project a narrative of inevitable victory and strength, exactly the opposite was true, and it would not be lost on anyone attending the forum. Foreman added that this strike was simply the latest in what he called a series of humiliations for the Russian president, following the notably subdued Victory Day parade in Moscow, which had been scaled back due to fears of Ukrainian drone attacks, as well as continued fuel shortages in Russian-occupied Crimea caused by prior Ukrainian strikes on energy infrastructure. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky confirmed the attack himself, posting on social media that critical facilities on Russian territory had been struck, including the Saint Petersburg Oil Terminal. He also announced that a weapons depot in the Tambov region, roughly 600 kilometers from the Ukrainian border, had been hit in the same overnight operation. Zelensky made clear this was not just retaliation. He said, and we are paraphrasing here, that Ukraine's strategy of long-range strikes is being implemented precisely as planned to bring peace closer. He signaled that Kyiv intends to escalate these long-range drone campaigns and warned that it is only a matter of time before Ukraine dramatically expands its reach even further. Think about what that means geographically. Ukraine's border with Russia sits approximately 1,100 kilometers away from St. Petersburg. The fact that Ukrainian drones are now reliably hitting targets at that distance, not once, not twice, but repeatedly, represents a fundamental shift in what this war is capable of becoming. But to understand where this war is going, we need to understand what happened just 48 hours before that strike on St. Petersburg. The night of June 1st into the early hours of June 2nd, 2026, will be remembered as one of the most devastating nights in Ukraine since the full-scale invasion began. Russia launched what Ukrainian air defense officials described as the largest combined missile and drone bombardment of the entire year. The numbers are staggering, and they need to be heard clearly. 656 attack drones and 73 missiles, ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and hypersonic Zircon missiles were fired across Ukraine in a single overnight attack. To put that in perspective, this was not a targeted military strike. This was a campaign of mass terror from the sky. Ukrainian air defenses worked around the clock and managed to intercept or neutralize 602 of those drones and 40 of the missiles. That is a remarkable achievement by any measure. But the missiles and drones that got through were devastating. At least 22 Ukrainian civilians were killed, and more than 130 were wounded across the country. In the capital, Kyiv, 6 people lost their lives. Mayor Vitaly Klitschko reported that 4 medical facilities were among the buildings damaged in his city. In the Podilsky district, a Russian strike caused a 9-story residential building to partially collapse. Ukrainian parliament speaker Ruslan Stefanchuk warned that people may still have been trapped under the rubble. In the Shevchenkivsky district, a 24-story apartment tower was struck directly, with the 4th and 5th floors consumed by fire. A car showroom, reportedly belonging to a Chinese company, was also engulfed in flames, sending a wall of fire across a busy urban block in the middle of the night. Residents of Kyiv, jolted awake by explosions, rushed with their children to underground metro stations and bomb shelters. Air raid sirens wailed for hours. Electricity was cut to approximately 140,000 residents across the capital. In the city of Dnipro, the carnage was even worse. Mayor Boris Filatov declared a day of mourning after 16 people were killed there, including 2 children. He reported that 49 residential buildings had been damaged, with 7 described as practically completely destroyed. And the strikes were not finished. Even as emergency crews were still responding to overnight damage, another drone struck a residential building in Dnipro in the early afternoon. Kharkiv, Ukraine's second-largest city, was also pounded. Multi-story residential buildings, vehicles, and government offices were damaged across multiple districts. In the Solomyansk district, a building between 15 and 24 stories, a residential tower, was struck. Near Konyad Garden in the Obolonsky district, drone debris ignited fires. Gas stations, medical clinics, and neighborhood businesses were left in ruin. Amid all of this destruction, there was one moment of defiance that cut through the horror. A Ukrainian Air Force F-16 fighter jet from the 107th Aviation Wing intercepted and destroyed a Russian Kh-101 cruise missile in mid-air before it could reach its intended target. It was a stunning display of pilot skill and the value of the Western aircraft that Ukraine has been fighting to obtain more of. Zelensky's response to the mass attack was urgent and directed at the world. He described the strikes as, in his words, an explicit statement by Russia that if Ukraine is not protected from ballistic missiles and other aerial strikes, those strikes will continue. He called on European nations to develop their own anti-ballistic missile defense infrastructure and made a direct appeal to the United States to urgently supply additional Patriot system interceptors. The message from Kyiv was unambiguous. The current level of air defense support is not enough. And that brings us to one of the most alarming dimensions of this war: the widening gap between Russia's offensive missile production and the West's ability to produce the interceptors needed to stop them. Here is a number that should stop you cold. Russia is currently producing approximately 70 Iskander and Kinzhal ballistic missiles every single month. The Western Patriot air defense system, which Ukraine depends on almost entirely to intercept those missiles, produces roughly 56 PAC-3 MSE interceptor rounds per month. Russia's production has now officially outpaced the West's ability to manufacture the primary tool used to counter it. Each time a Patriot battery fires 2 interceptors at a single incoming ballistic missile, which is standard procedure, that engagement costs more interceptors than Russia spent producing the threat. Russia understands this math, and defense analysts say this production gap is a deliberate strategic calculation, not an accident. Moscow is grinding down Ukraine's air defense inventory one night of mass strikes at a time, knowing that Western factories simply cannot keep pace. Ukraine is not unaware of this. Zelensky has repeated his calls for more interceptors, more air defense batteries, more Western military support. But with U.S. defense stockpiles stretched thin, in part due to commitments elsewhere in the world, the pipeline of Patriot interceptors reaching Ukraine has remained critically insufficient. While Russia pummels Ukrainian cities from the air, Ukraine has developed a counter-strategy that has genuinely shocked Moscow and stunned military analysts who study asymmetric warfare. Unable to match Russia gun for gun or missile for missile, Ukraine made a calculated decision early in the conflict to invest massively in drone technology, not by purchasing expensive foreign systems, but by building their own. Ukraine has developed an entire domestic drone industry from virtually nothing, and the results have been extraordinary. The FP1 and FP2 series of drones, developed indigenously by Ukrainian engineers, have become precision instruments capable of penetrating deep into Russian territory to hit high-value targets. The Moruk, a long-range strike drone, has been used to strike Russian oil depots, ammunition warehouses, and naval facilities hundreds of kilometers behind the front line. Ukraine also fields a drone called the Bullet, an interceptor platform designed to hunt down and destroy incoming Russian drones before they can reach Ukrainian territory. These are not expensive, sophisticated platforms that require months of pilot training. They are relatively low-cost, highly effective weapons that Ukraine is now producing at scale, and they have forced Russia into an embarrassing defensive posture, a superpower building physical barriers and painting its military trucks in disruptive camouflage patterns to confuse the AI-powered targeting systems built into Ukrainian drones. Russian military vehicles are now being coated in what analysts call dazzle paint, a pattern specifically engineered to interfere with the machine vision targeting algorithms that guide Ukraine's most advanced drone systems. The fact that Russia is spending engineering resources painting trucks is in itself a testament to how effective Ukraine's drone campaign has become. Beyond that, Russia has had to develop portable, AI-equipped anti-drone systems like the Yolka Hunter to protect its military assets from Ukrainian aerial intrusion. Russia has also dramatically ramped up its own drone production since 2022, deploying large quantities of Shahed category loitering munitions, similar to the Iranian Shahed drones, as well as domestically produced platforms like the Orion for surveillance and strike missions. But here is where the story takes a sharp and sobering turn. For all of Ukraine's ingenuity and bravery in this drone war, the brutal reality is this. When Russia decides to unleash the full weight of its ballistic missile arsenal, Ukraine has no adequate answer. Ballistic missiles travel at hypersonic speeds. They are extraordinarily difficult to intercept. The Kinzhal hypersonic missile, which Russia used in this latest mass attack, travels at up to 9 times the speed of sound. The Zircon anti-ship missile, also deployed in the June 2nd attack, with officials noting it was likely the largest number of Zircon missiles ever used in a single strike, is capable of reaching a target over 600 miles away. No air defense system currently in Ukraine's inventory is designed to reliably stop these weapons at the speed and volume at which Russia is now deploying them. Ukraine is also facing a systemic depletion problem. Each interceptor fired from a Patriot battery costs significantly more to produce than the drones and missiles Russia is firing at it. Russia knows this. The June 2nd attack, with its 656 drones and 73 missiles, was designed not just to cause destruction, but to drain Ukraine's interceptor stockpile, saturate the defenses, force the air defense batteries to choose which threats to engage and which to let through. It is a cold, calculated strategy of attrition, and it is working. Now let us zoom out and ask the question that every defense minister in Europe is asking right now. Is this war going to stay inside Ukraine? The answer is not as certain as anyone would like. Russia has been quietly, deliberately, and comprehensively preparing for a conflict that goes far beyond Ukraine. Across every domain, land, sea, and air, Moscow has been sharpening its military capabilities to a degree that has NATO analysts on high alert. At sea, on June 1st, 2026, the Russian Navy deployed its heavy nuclear-powered battlecruiser Admiral Nakhimov into the final phase of sea trials, completing a modernization project that took nearly 30 years and is estimated to have cost as much as $5 billion. The Admiral Nakhimov is a Kirov-class warship, the only class of nuclear-powered surface combat vessel in service anywhere in the world. Its modernized weapons package includes approximately 176 vertical launch cells capable of firing Caliber cruise missiles, Onyx anti-ship missiles, and Zircon hypersonic missiles. It carries 96 long-range air defense cells, as well as advanced anti-submarine warfare systems. It is, by any measure, one of the most formidable surface warships on the planet. Defense analysts are divided on its significance. On one hand, the Nakhimov represents a genuine leap in Russia's naval striking power, particularly in Arctic waters, where its nuclear propulsion gives it virtually unlimited range and the ability to sustain operations in regions where supply infrastructure is sparse. On the other hand, some analysts point out that the age of the giant surface combatant may itself be coming to an end. Ukraine has already demonstrated in the Black Sea that relatively small, inexpensive naval drones can force Russia's much larger fleet to retreat. A ship that cost $5 billion to modernize may be extraordinarily vulnerable to a swarm of unmanned surface vehicles costing a fraction of that. At the same time, Russia conducted a live missile test from one of its nuclear-powered submarines in the Barents Sea, firing an Onyx cruise missile that struck a naval target more than 200 kilometers away. The Russian military's submarine fleet remains one of its most powerful and most difficult to counter strategic assets, capable of projecting force across vast distances with almost no warning. What does all of this mean when placed side by side? Russia is simultaneously raining mass destruction on Ukrainian cities, developing and deploying advanced drone technology, modernizing its nuclear-powered naval fleet, outproducing the West in ballistic missiles, and developing AI-powered counter-drone systems, all at once. The Institute for the Study of War noted this week that Russia's spring-summer 2026 ground offensive has largely stalled. Battlefield gains have been minimal. Russia has been unable to achieve the kind of decisive territorial breakthrough that would force Kyiv to the negotiating table on Moscow's terms. What experts are increasingly describing is a deliberate shift in Russian strategy, away from ground offensives and toward a campaign of aerial terror and infrastructure destruction designed to break the Ukrainian population's will to resist. When you cannot win on the battlefield, you try to make life so unbearable for the civilian population that the government is forced to capitulate. That is the calculus behind launching 656 drones and 73 missiles into residential neighborhoods in the middle of the night. And Ukraine's retaliation against Saint Petersburg, striking Putin's hometown oil terminal on the opening day of his international economic showcase, is Kyiv's counter-message. You may be able to make our cities burn, but we can make yours burn too. We can reach you. We can embarrass you. We can find your most strategically important, most politically sensitive targets, and we will keep finding them. The question that haunts this conflict is whether that cycle of escalation has a ceiling, or whether we are watching the early stages of something far larger. NATO has been watching every development with quiet, focused alarm. Russia's military buildup is not just calibrated for Ukraine. The scale of missile production, the modernization of the nuclear fleet, the development of AI-enabled counter-drone systems, the testing of hypersonic weapons at scale, none of these investments make sense if the objective is simply to hold territory in eastern Ukraine. These are preparations for a longer, wider confrontation. Defense ministers from Poland to the Baltic states to Germany have been saying publicly, with increasing urgency, that Russia must be taken at its word when its officials speak about the threat posed by NATO. And Russia's military posture, by nearly every available metric, has been oriented toward that potential confrontation. NATO's own assessments suggest that Russia is outproducing the alliance in certain critical munitions categories. The Iskander and Kinzhal missile production rate of 70 units per month is a number that NATO's planners are acutely aware of. At the same time, the US and European defense industries have been under enormous pressure to accelerate production timelines for interceptors, artillery shells, armored vehicles, and air defense systems, both for Ukraine and to replenish NATO stockpiles that have been drawn down by years of support to Kyiv. The math is tight, and in a prolonged conflict, math matters more than courage. For the people living through all of this, the residents of Kyiv who spent another night running to metro stations, the families in Dnipro who lost children in the rubble of a collapsed apartment building, the residents of Saint Petersburg who woke up to black smoke on the horizon, the geopolitical calculations feel a world away. A woman named Olha Mudra was photographed outside a destroyed apartment building in Kyiv after the June 2nd attack. She was holding her 6-year-old daughter. She told Reuters, and we are paraphrasing, she could not understand what was happening. It was like some kind of apocalypse. Everything was covered in debris. Everything was smoke. You could see nothing. That is the human reality of this war. Not satellite imagery of burning oil terminals, not missile production spreadsheets. A mother and her daughter standing in front of rubble where their neighbors' homes used to be. Over 140,000 Kyiv residents lost electricity in the June 2nd attack. 4 hospitals were damaged. Emergency crews worked through the night and into the next day, pulling survivors from collapsed buildings. Dnipro declared a day of city mourning, and the following night, the sirens went off again. This is life in Ukraine in 2026. More than 4 years after Russia's full-scale invasion began, the war has not found a political resolution. Peace talks remain deadlocked, battlefield lines remain largely frozen, and the aerial bombardment continues to escalate. So where does this war end? Honestly, no one knows. And anyone who tells you otherwise is not being straight with you. What we can say with confidence is this: Ukraine has demonstrated that it is capable of surviving, adapting, and fighting back against a nuclear-armed superpower in ways that no military analyst predicted in February 2022. The drone innovation coming out of Ukrainian workshops and engineering labs is, by any measure, one of the most remarkable military technological stories of the modern era. A country that was not among the world's top drone producers 4 years ago has now built a domestic drone industry capable of striking targets more than 1,000 kilometers inside Russian territory. What we can also say with confidence is that Russia is not giving up. It is not running out of missiles. It is producing more of them every month than the West can produce the tools to intercept. It has restructured its economy around war production. It has modernized its navy. It has tested its newest hypersonic weapons under real combat conditions. And it has shown a willingness to fire hundreds of weapons at civilian apartment buildings in the middle of the night with apparent indifference to international condemnation. The strike on the Saint Petersburg Oil Terminal was Ukraine's most dramatic and symbolically powerful long-range attack to date, hitting Putin's hometown on the opening day of his international economic showcase while his invited guests sat inside watching black smoke drift across the skyline, sent a message that no Kremlin spokesperson could spin away. But it also carries risk. Zelensky himself acknowledged that Kyiv plans to escalate its long-range campaign. Every escalation invites a counter-escalation, and Russia's capacity for counter-escalation in terms of sheer destructive firepower remains dramatically larger than Ukraine's. The asymmetric warfare that Ukraine has mastered is extraordinary, but asymmetric warfare has limits. Drones can embarrass a superpower, they can drain its resources, they can make its generals look foolish and its propaganda look hollow, but they cannot stop a hypersonic missile traveling at 9 times the speed of sound. They cannot replace the air defense batteries that Ukraine's cities desperately need, and they cannot substitute for the political will of Ukraine's Western allies to match Russian missile production with a sustained and sufficient flow of defensive weapons. The drone war between Russia and Ukraine is the defining military story of our time. It is changing how wars will be fought for generations. And right now, tonight, it is far from over. For our entire team, stay informed, stay engaged, and stay with us for the latest developments as this conflict continues to unfold. We'll be right here.